Ta-da! Hello students, today we're talking about the very first civilization. It's been described as the civilization of Mesopotamia, but more specifically it's Sumer, which is sort of the southern part of Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamians and Sumerians kind of used interchangeably in this lesson. So these first civilizations developed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You can see them right here. In between them and around them, pretty fertile land for farming. This is in modern-day Iraq. I saw one of those rivers with my own eyes every day. I believe it was the Tigris. But regardless, it was a good place for civilization to crop up. This area is known as the cradle of civilization, but it was a double-edged sword because the river there provided good farmland, but it would also overflow and destroy farms and, ruin homes and carry away livestock, things like that. But when it did flood, it would put down a layer of silt, which is like river mud. That was very nutrient rich and good for farming. So as time progressed, the people that had settled here, they went from being hunter-gatherers, and then they learned to farm, and then they learned to build irrigation and canals and dams to control the flooding. And eventually they ended up having a surplus of food. And when you have a surplus of food and then people stop do subsistence farming, they can start focusing on other things. That's when you start to have permanent settlements. Permanent villages become civilizations because you have time for things like government and reading and writing and art and things like that. So once food became plentiful, people could focus on things that weren't farming. Farming villages turned into cities. The first cities in Sumer were Uruk, and Eridu. They sound all the same. The land between cities was harsh, though it was a pretty desert-like climate. As a result, the cities developed independent of one another, and they became what is known as city-states. Basically, it's a government controlling the city and the land around them, kind of like a country, but very small, really focused on one city and the surrounding area. The populations of a city-state can run anywhere from 5 to 20,000, and each city-state is believed to have had a wall around it for protection. The wall was made from mud bricks, as was the buildings, because wood and other building materials were pretty sparse. At times, the city-states would fight each other, and other times they would trade and even form alliances against common enemies to protect common interests. Here we have a picture of a ziggurat, because the Sumerians, they were polytheistic, believing in many gods, and although all gods were honored, a city had a special god for which they would build a ziggurat, sort of like the patron god of that city. At the top of the ziggurat was a shrine, where only the priest was allowed to go. It's said that the god lived in this shrine. The priests were originally the rulers of the cities, but over time monarchies formed, so like a king, queen, that kind of thing. They're hereditary, so the prince would become the king. The monarchies actually claimed that their authority came from the gods. Let's talk about social groups. There were three main social classes in Sumer. At the top was the king, royalty, warriors, and priests. In the middle class were your farmers, merchants, and artisans, people like that. At the very bottom rung of society was the slaves, who were typically prisoners of war. Sumer had a traditional family structure with basically men in charge. Men did the farming, men did the work, and the ladies stayed at home and took care of the house and raised the children. Boys went to school and learned a skill. Most people in Sumeria were farmers, and you typically took the same job up as your parents. If you were the son of a farmer, you would be a farmer. If you were the son of a pot maker, you'd be a pot maker. If you were the son of the king, well, you'd become the king. So farming was a major part of the Sumerian economy. Sumer did not have large metal deposits, so they relied on trading to get them. The agricultural goods of Sumer were the main export. Any metal that was in Mesopotamia basically had been traded for with food, so they basically grew food and traded it for things like precious metals and stones. Contributions of Sumeria. As the first civilizations, Sumer served as a template for, well, the next civilizations. Many ideas that began in Sumeria became the starting point for further works. The greatest example of this had been their form of writing, which was called cuneiform. It was a system of wedges with over 1,000 characters. You can see here they did all their writing by punching wedges into clay tablets. They didn't have paper yet. But when you arrange the wedges in different ways, you end up with different letters or characters, and there were over 1,000 of them. Only the well-off in general knew how to read and write cuneiform. There was a special occupation for it called scribes. If you were a scribe, that meant you basically recorded things. And they recorded everything from legal documents like marriage documents and even business contracts, things like that. And there are even recordings of the everyday happenings within the cities. The oldest story, the oldest tale in the world is actually from Sumeria. It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. An epic is like a story that's a big long poem. In the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's about the king of Uruk, and it's a pretty wild tale about fighting monsters, fighting other people. His friend dies, his best friend, his bestie, gets killed. It is an epic, sort of a ancient fairy tale of sorts. Other Sumerian contributions include the wheel, pretty important one, the sailboat, and even a 12-month calendar based off of moon cycles. They also had basic math and astronomy. And that's pretty much your lesson for the day. I would advise you to read it in the book, Chapter 3, Lesson 1. And then go ahead and take the quiz on the next page. It's a pretty simple standard quiz, 5 questions, 10 points, 2 attempts. That's it for today. If you need anything, as always, feel free to contact me. And have a wonderful week.